What if the man fixing your broken barn wasn't just a drifter with calloused hands, but a billionaire running from everything money couldn't fix? And what if the woman who welcomed him in just for a meal and a place to sleep was the only person who ever saw who he really was, long before the world did? This is a story about love that rebuilds more than old wood. It's about the kind of kindness that changes lives, and the quiet strength it takes to choose someone not for what they have, but for who they are. If you love heartfelt stories about second chances, unexpected love, and the quiet magic of doing the right thing, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment like this one. Now, let's begin the story of poor mechanic repairs her family's barn. They disowned her for loving him, unaware he's a billionaire. Tiucho. Rain had started just before sundown, a slow, insistent tapping against the porch roof, like someone trying gently but stubbornly to be let in. By nightfall, it was a full downpour, sheets of water rushing across the cracked dirt driveway, soaking the tall grass that had gone uncut since late spring. Thunder rolled over the Kansas sky like a growl, too tired to roar. Emily Palmer stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed tight against her chest, watching as the wind whipped through the sycamores by the old barn. What was left of it, anyway? The west side had been caving in for years, and tonight's storm might finally finish the job. She hadn't planned to come back. Not really. But when her father called last week, voice thin and trembling, asking if she could come take a look at the place, she knew what he really meant. He wasn't getting better, and the farm, what little was left of it, was slipping through his fingers. She hadn't expected the memories to hit so hard. The barn, the kitchen with its cracked linoleum, the musty scent of her mother's quilt, still folded on the couch like she'd never left. Her mother had died the previous spring, and nothing in this house had moved since. Even the grief felt stale, like a coat she'd forgotten she was wearing, and now the storm. The lights flickered. She exhaled slowly, already bracing for the darkness. Then she saw it, headlights, dim through the rain, bouncing up the driveway like the car's suspension was on its last breath. She narrowed her eyes. The truck that pulled in was old, rust-colored, with a dented fender and mud-caked tires. It sputtered to a stop near the barn, and for a moment all Emily could hear was the engine ticking, cooling. She stepped down from the porch, heart pounding without a reason. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out, pulling up the hood of his oil-stained jacket. "Evening," he called over the rain, voice calm and low. Emily hesitated. "Can I help you?" He stepped closer, into the glow of the porch light. He was probably late 30s, maybe early 40s, with a strong build and stubble that hadn't seen a razor in days. Rain ran off his jacket in streams, his boots squelched in the gravel. "Name's Jack. I passed through town earlier. The lady at the diner said there might be some work out this way." He gestured toward the barn. "Said your place had a roof ready to cave in." Emily's eyes narrowed. "She's got a big mouth." Jack gave a lopsided smile. "She said you pay in warm meals and dry shelter, and right now I could really use both." Emily looked him over. His hands were calloused, his jeans torn at the knee. He didn't seem dangerous, just tired, and wet and a little too calm for someone soaked to the bone. She nodded toward the barn. "You a carpenter?" He shrugged. "Mechanic, mostly, but I've rebuilt enough frames to keep a barn from falling." A gust of wind snapped a branch from one of the trees. It hit the ground with a dull crack. Emily flinched. "I'll need to see your ID," she said finally. Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a battered wallet, handing it over. She glanced at it. Jack Rourke, Kansas-born. Everything checked out. She handed it back. "You can sleep in the tack room behind the barn. There's a cot and a space heater if it hasn't shorted out." He tilted his head. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," she said automatically. "Emily's fine. He smiled, then turned toward the barn as thunder cracked overhead. The storm kept her awake most of the night. She lay in her childhood bedroom, the ceiling water-stained and buckling at one corner, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Somewhere, outside, Jack was sleeping, or maybe fixing something. Who knew what kind of person wandered through Kansas with a toolbox and a talent for patching broken things, and yet something about him made her feel safe? No, not safe, but steadier. As if the weight she carried had shifted just a little. In the morning, she found him already at work. The barn smelled of wet hay and old cedar. Jack stood on a ladder, one leg braced, inspecting a beam overhead. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, sweat already lining his forehead. "Coffee?" she offered, stepping in with a thermos. He looked down, surprised. "You read my mind." She handed it up to him, watching as he took a sip and closed his eyes in appreciation. "You weren't lying about this place," he said, nodding at the cracked joists. "This barn's got one foot in the grave." "I grew up in here," Emily said, half to herself. "It used to be beautiful." Jack climbed down and looked at her, not with pity, but with something gentler. "Respect, maybe. Then let's try to bring it back to life," she smiled despite herself. "You always fix what's broken." Jack took another sip of coffee and looked up at the beams. "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes I just hold things together long enough for someone else to come along and finish the job." Emily looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. Somehow she knew Jack Rourke wasn't just passing through. He was the storm, and maybe, just maybe, he was also the calm that followed. The scent of fresh sawdust drifted across the yard like an old memory, warm, earthy, familiar. Emily stood just outside the barn with 2 mugs of coffee in hand, watching the morning light pour through the broken slats in the roof. It bathed everything in a pale gold glow, softening the years of dust and disrepair. Jack was already working, as if the dawn had called him up before the rooster. He wore a flannel shirt, sleeves pushed past his elbows, and his jeans were streaked with mud from the knees down. The ladder was propped against the center beam, and he moved across it with a confidence that said he knew the language of lumber and nails. "You weren't kidding," he called down as she approached. "This beam's been patched so many times. I think it's held together with prayer and good intentions." Emily chuckled and handed him a mug. "That's the spirit of the place." He took it, sipped, and closed his eyes briefly. "You make good coffee." "My mother's recipe," she said. She believed in strong coffee and stronger women. Jack offered a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sounds like someone I'd like to have met." There was a pause, comfortable, not awkward, and Emily leaned against a support post, feeling its roughness beneath her palm. "She died last year," she said quietly. "Lung cancer, never smoked a day." "In her life?" Jack nodded slowly, setting the mug on the rafter beside him. "I'm sorry. She'd be glad to know someone's finally fixing this place. This barn was her favorite spot. She used to paint in here back before everything turned into bills and caretaking." "You paint too?" "I used to." Emily hesitated. "I stopped when I moved to the city. It felt impractical." Jack climbed down the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag. "Funny how we leave behind what we love most, thinking we'll come back to it someday." She looked at him then, really looked. There was something in his face, something worn and weathered, but not broken, like a book that had been read 100 times and still held together. "You talk like someone who's left a lot behind." Jack didn't answer right away. He walked over to a pile of lumber and began sorting through pieces, checking for rot. "I've moved around," he said finally. "Fixed things for folks who couldn't afford real repairs. I like working with my hands." "That's not really an answer," Emily said, folding her arms. He glanced up at her. "No, it's not." They stared at each other for a moment, and then Emily smiled. "You're not from around here, are you?" "Not anymore." That answer should have felt evasive, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it stirred a curiosity in her, a gentle tug, like a string attached to something far away. "I should warn you," she said lightly. "My family doesn't take well to strangers." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Are you warning me off, or just giving me a heads up?" "I'm giving you credit for sticking around this long." He gave a small laugh. "Fair enough." Emily gestured to the stack of boards. "If you need help with anything—" "Actually," he interrupted, "you want to hold that plank while I mark the cut?" She blinked. "Sure." It was a small thing, holding a board steady while he measured and chalked the line, but it felt oddly intimate. Their hands brushed once, briefly, and she was surprised by the jolt it sent up her arm. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of their movements sinking naturally. Measure, cut, nail. It was like a quiet dance. The barn, their dusty ballroom. At one point she caught him humming under his breath. "You sing too?" "Only when the work's going well," he said. Emily laughed, and the sound surprised her. She hadn't laughed like that in months, maybe years. Later that afternoon, as Jack packed up his tools, Emily brought out sandwiches wrapped in wax. "Paper, I figured you earned lunch," she said. He took one with a grateful nod and sat on the edge of the porch steps, squinting into the sun. "You planning to sell this place?" he asked after a few bites. Emily shook her head. "No, my brother wants to. He thinks it's a waste of space and money. But to me, it's home, even when it hurts." Jack chewed thoughtfully. "It's worth fighting for." She looked at him. "Do you have something like that?" He hesitated, then gave a slow shake of the head. "I did. Once. But I walked away from it." "Why?" His jaw tensed slightly. "Because sometimes the things you build start to build a prison around you. You don't see it happening until one day you can't breathe." Emily's breath caught. She didn't ask more, though 1,000 questions burned on her tongue. Instead, she simply said, "You ever think about going back?" Jack looked out. Over the field, where the grass bent in waves under the breeze. Every damn day. That night, Emily sat by her bedroom window with her sketchbook, the one she hadn't opened in years. Her pencil moved slowly at first, uncertain, then more freely as lines began to take shape. A beam, a ladder, a man in a flannel shirt, standing tall against the skeleton of the barn. She looked at what she'd drawn and felt something shift inside her, a seed, a beginning. The early autumn air had a crispness to it that morning, the kind that hinted at frost but still clung to the last warmth of summer. Emily pulled on an old denim jacket and stepped out with a mug of coffee cradled in her hands. The barn stood, silent, strong, like it was beginning to remember what it had once been. Jack was already inside, of course. He'd become a part of the rhythm now, like the wind, like sunrise. "Morning," she called, stepping over the threshold. "Morning," he echoed from somewhere up in the loft. She climbed the wooden ladder, carefully, one rung at a time. The loft was dusty, the air thick with the scent of old hay, dried wood, and time itself. Jack knelt in the corner, brushing cobwebs from a wooden trunk Emily hadn't seen in years. "Found this behind the support beam," he said, glancing back at her. "Must have been wedged in during some old repair job. Looks like it hasn't. Been opened in a while." Emily set her coffee down and crouched beside him. The trunk was small, cedar, its brass hinges dulled with age. Her heart stuttered as her fingers traced the carved initials on the top. MP, her mother. "Margaret Palmer. I didn't know this was here," she whispered. "Want me to step out?" She shook her head. "No, it's okay." The lid groaned open and the scent of cedar rushed out, soft and comforting, like a long-forgotten lullaby. Inside lay a stack of sketches, delicate and yellowed at the edges, tied with a faded ribbon. Beneath them, a journal with a cracked leather cover. Emily picked it up and sat against the wall, the loft creaking gently beneath her. Jack settled across from her, but kept his distance, respectful and quiet. She opened the journal. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, strong, looping cursive, confident in a way Emily had always admired. "This barn is more than timber and nails. It's the only place I've ever felt fully myself. When I paint here, I remember who I was before the world told me who to be." Emily swallowed hard. She turned another page, her fingers trembling. "I loved someone once, before Robert. He was a dreamer, not a man my parents approved of. He wanted to build things with his hands. I wanted to build a life with him, but I let go. I told myself love would come again. It never did, not like that." Emily closed the journal gently and rested it on her lap. Her throat tightened with emotion, grief, understanding, and something close to regret for things she couldn't change. "She never told me any of this," she said softly. "Maybe she didn't know how," Jack said, his voice equally low. "Sometimes it's easier to leave pieces of ourselves behind than to explain them." Emily looked at him, and for a moment the space between them was heavy with unspoken things. "You ever let go of someone you shouldn't have?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, strong, scarred, honest hands, and said, "Yeah, I did." "What happened?" "I trusted the world more than I trusted myself," he said. "Thought I was doing the right thing, but sometimes doing the right thing still leaves you hollow." They sat there for a while, surrounded by dust and memories, two people quietly trying to make sense of the past through the fragile lens of the present. Emily eventually returned the journal and drawings to the trunk, but she held on to one sketch, a watercolor of the barn in its prime. Lush fields surrounded it, the roof bright red, sunlight spilling across the beams. "That's how she saw it," she murmured. "Then that's what we'll bring it back to," Jack said, standing. Emily glanced up at him, surprised. "You really think we can?" Jack smiled, not the lopsided grin he wore when joking, but something sincere, firm. "I know we can." Later that day, they worked side by side in the lower section of the barn, replacing a series of warped floorboards. The work was quiet, rhythmic, almost meditative. Jack showed her how to hold the nail gun properly, how to let the weight of the tool do the work. She caught him watching her once, his expression unreadable, and felt her cheeks warm. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they paused to rest. Leaning against the half-finished wall, Emily pulled the folded sketch from her pocket and held it out. "She drew this of you," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure I wasn't around back then." "No," Emily said. "But she drew it for the man she wished she could have stayed with, a man who built with his hands, a man her family didn't understand." Jack's gaze shifted to the painting, then back to her. "You think I'm that man?" "No," she said, and then smiled. "I think you're the second chance she never got." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Jack looked away, clearing his throat. "I should finish cutting those boards." Emily let him go, not because she wanted to, but because she could see he needed the space. She understood that kind of silence, the kind that builds up around grief and loss and stays even when the people are long gone. But something had shifted, not just in the barn, but between them. Something unspoken, something real. The knock on the door was sharp and familiar, the kind of sound that didn't wait to be welcomed. Emily froze halfway through, folding a load of clean laundry, heart suddenly thudding in her chest. She hadn't heard that knock in over a year, but she knew it instantly. David. Sure enough, when she opened the door, there he stood in pressed slacks, a blazer far too formal for a Wednesday afternoon, and that same polished smile that had once charmed every woman at the county fair. Behind him, his wife Sarah held a dish of something covered in foil. Emily could smell rosemary and condescension before a single word was spoken. "Well," David said, stepping across the threshold without waiting. "Still smells like Mom's house. Didn't expect it to hit me like this." Emily blinked. "You didn't say you were coming." "I didn't want to give you a chance to say no." She closed the door with a sigh as Sarah followed, placing the dish on the counter with delicate precision. "We were in town for a fundraiser," Sarah said, smiling thinly. "Thought we'd stop by. Check in." "Check in," Emily repeated, arms folding. David turned, hands in his pockets. "You're really doing it, huh? Staying here, fixing the place." Emily met his gaze. "I am. Is that wise?" "It's what feels right." David glanced out the kitchen window, where the barn stood framed in early evening light. Jack was outside, shirt damp with sweat, driving stakes into the ground for a new beam brace. David squinted. "That him?" he asked. Emily didn't answer. "Look, Em," David continued, "I get the nostalgia. We all miss Mom. But this isn't how we move on. Living here, sinking money into a dying structure. What's the plan? Host barn weddings." Emily's jaw clenched. "The plan is to keep what matters, to hold on to something that's ours. Not everything has to turn a profit to be worth saving." David snorted. "That's easy to say when you don't have bills piling up." "I'm managing." "With what?" His voice hardened. "That guy out there, he's what? Your handyman, boyfriend, guardian angel?" Emily stepped back, startled by the edge in his tone. "That man has done more for this place in 2 weeks than you have in 10 years. David looked at her long and hard, then leaned on the kitchen counter. "I don't like it. I don't trust him. You don't know him." "I know the type," David said. "They drift through small towns, looking for women with hearts too big and wallets too small. They fix a few fences, say all the right things, then disappear once they've gotten what they want." Emily stared at him, stunned. "You think I'm that naive?" David didn't answer. Sarah cleared her throat, stepping gently between them. "Maybe we're just worried," she said softly. "You've been through a lot, Em. You're grieving. People make emotional choices when they're vulnerable." Emily looked at them both. "This isn't about emotion. It's about honoring something Mom loved, something I love. And Jack, he's not what you think." David straightened. "Then what is he?" Emily didn't reply, because she wasn't sure how to answer. Not yet. Later that evening, she found Jack by the barn, kneeling beside the new foundation post, checking the level. "Trouble?" he asked without looking up. She hesitated. "My brother showed up. That the guy in the Audi with the haircut that costs more than my truck?" A small laugh escaped her. "That's the one." He set the level aside and sat back on his heels. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Okay." She sat beside him anyway, on the grass still warm from the sun. Crickets had begun their nightly chorus, and a breeze stirred the leaves high above. "He doesn't like you," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "Didn't expect him to. He thinks I'm being reckless, that you're using me." Jack's expression didn't change, but his hands fidgeted, restless, like they were looking for a tool to hold. "I've been called worse," he said after a moment. Emily looked over. "Is he wrong?" Jack turned to meet her eyes. Whatever he saw in hers made him pause. "I'm not here for money," he said simply. "I'm not here for pity. I'm here because something about this place feels honest, and I haven't had much of that in my life lately." Emily nodded, unsure what to say. The stars were starting to appear, faint pinpricks in a sky still bruised with twilight. "My family's broken," she said. "Not loud and dramatic, just split, quietly, like a crack in a glass you don't notice until it shatters." Jack reached for the level again, more out of habit than purpose. "Most families are, but I thought coming back here might fix something, that if I worked hard enough, believed deep enough, I could make things whole again." He set the tool down and faced her fully. "Maybe it's not about fixing what was," he said. "Maybe it's about building something new, something worth keeping." Emily blinked, suddenly overwhelmed. "That's the kind of thing my mother used to say." Jack smiled softly. "Then maybe we're on the right path." They sat in silence as the stars bloomed brighter, the barn beside them standing taller than it had in years, not just in wood, but in spirit. Tomorrow the work would Continue. But tonight, they'd drawn a line in the dirt and chosen which side to stand on, together. The sound of hammers and laughter had faded by evening, replaced by the low hum of cicadas and the occasional creak of the barn settling into itself. Emily sat alone on the front steps of the farmhouse, the coolness of the wood seeping through. Her jeans, a mason jar of sweet tea, sweated beside her. She hadn't seen Jack since lunch. She wasn't sure if he was avoiding her or just giving her space after yesterday's blow-up with David. The barn's exterior looked sturdier now. The new braces Jack installed had transformed its once collapsing side into something that looked hopeful, as if it might still have a few good decades left in it. But hope, Emily had learned, was a delicate thing. When she heard his footsteps approaching from the barn, she didn't turn. She waited, listening to the gravel crunch beneath his boots, then the soft thud as he lowered himself to sit beside her. He smelled like cedar and sweat and something she couldn't quite name. Honesty, maybe. For a long while they just sat, no words, just breath and night and presence. Finally she spoke. "Why don't you tell people who you are?" Jack was silent. "I know there's more," she added quietly, "than just a guy who drifts from town to town fixing barns for coffee and a cot." He didn't look at her. Instead, he watched the trees sway under the moonlight, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. "I used to own things," he said finally. "Big things. People, too. At least the kind who shake your hand like they mean it. Then count your money behind your back." Emily said nothing, letting the space between them hold the weight of his confession. "I started a company when I was 26, he continued. "Tech infrastructure, smart diagnostics for heavy machinery. It took off, faster than I was ready for." She turned toward him. "Why did you leave?" His jaw clenched. For a moment he looked younger, like a man lost in a memory that still hurt. "My sister, Kate," he said softly. "She was the heart of everything. She handled people while I handled systems. We built it together." "What happened?" Emily asked, though she already sensed the answer in his voice. "She overdosed," he whispered. "A week before her 30th birthday. Stress, depression, maybe burnout, maybe something else. I don't know. I missed the signs." Emily's breath caught. "I found her in her apartment," Jack said, voice raw. Everything was neat, labels still on the pill bottles. Like she wanted it to look like an accident. He paused. The media had a field day, tragedy in the tech world. They made her into a cautionary tale, a headline, but not a person. Emily reached for his hand and found it trembling. "I tried to go back, run the company, put on the right suit, smile for investors, but everything tasted like ash. I didn't want to build anymore. I just wanted to disappear." "So you did," he nodded. "I gave away controlling shares, set up a foundation. In her name, took a truck and left." Emily was silent for a long moment. Then, "Why fix barns?" Jack gave a wry smile. "Because it's real. It doesn't lie to you. Wood rots, metal bends, things fall apart, but when you put them back together, they stay. And you don't need a PR team to tell you whether it matters." Her heart ached. In for him, not in pity, but in recognition. She understood grief that carved deep and left you hollow, changed. "She would have been proud," Emily said. "I don't know about that," he murmured. "I do." The next morning, Jack was gone. Not gone. His tools were still there, his truck parked by the barn, but he hadn't slept in the tack room. The cot was still made, untouched. Emily walked the property, calling his name, a knot forming in her stomach. By noon, worry had shifted into frustration. He'd opened up to her, let her in, and now he was vanishing, just like David said, just like every warning she didn't want to believe. She found him by the old windmill, sitting on a fallen log, elbows on his knees. His shoulders were slumped, like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. "I'm not good at this," he said before she could speak. "At what?" "Being known." Emily folded her arms. You think running away makes it easier? No, he admitted. It just makes it quieter. She sat beside him close enough to feel his warmth. You told me something real last night, something hard, and then you disappear without a word. That's not honesty, Jack, that's fear. He looked down. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm not hurt, she said, though her voice wavered. I'm tired of people walking away before they even try. He turned toward her slowly, eyes shadowed. I don't want to be another person who lets you down. Then don't. The silence stretched. A breeze swept through the grass, and somewhere a hawk cried overhead. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph. He handed it to her. It was of a young woman, smiling, arms slung around a younger version of Jack. Their resemblance was unmistakable. She loved barns, he said. We grew up around them. Old, falling down. Places like this. She said they reminded her of people, worn out but still worth saving. Emily held the photo gently, reverently. She sounds like someone I would have liked. Jack looked at her, something loosening in his gaze. I think she would have liked you too. And for the first time, Emily saw it. The man beneath the mystery. Not just a drifter or a mechanic or even a grieving brother, but someone still standing after all the pieces of his life had broken around him, and maybe someone who wanted to start building again. The following morning the sky was a steel-grey sheet stretched tight over the land, heavy with the promise of rain but withholding. Emily stood alone in the barn, sleeves rolled up, hands coated in sawdust. Jack hadn't come by since their conversation near the windmill, and though she'd half expected him to vanish again, something told her this time he needed her to stay, so she did the only thing she could do. She worked. The barn was half finished, a skeleton of what it once was and what it could be. Exposed beams jutted like ribs. The south wall stood bare, waiting to be rebuilt. She stared at the pieces of lumber Jack had carefully measured and marked before he left, like breadcrumbs. In a trail, the design was his, but the work now, it was hers. Emily picked up the framing hammer, heavier than it looked, and closed her fingers around the grip. Her palms still bore faint calluses from weeks of holding nails and tools, but today it felt different. Today, she was doing this not with Jack, but because of him. Because he believed she could. She lined up the first plank, braced it, and drove the nail in. The jolt echoed up her arm, more shocking than painful. She adjusted, learned, tried again. The second nail went in straighter. The third was smooth. By the fifth, she was breathing differently. Her shoulders loosened. Her spine straightened. She didn't stop for hours. When the rain finally came, it came soft, like a whisper. Emily retreated to the tack room, towel around her neck, sweat cooling on her brow. Her body ached in new ways, but it was the kind of ache that told you were alive. She reached into the drawer beneath the old supply shelf, looking for a dry rag, and her fingers brushed something hard and unfamiliar. She pulled out a thin, weather-worn envelope tucked beneath an old roll of twine. The handwriting on the front stopped her cold. Margaret Palmer, her mother. There was no stamp, no return address, just the word, "For Emily," written in faded. Ink hands trembling slightly, she opened it. Inside was a single folded page in her mother's graceful script. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I can only hope you're back in this barn. I can't know why or what led you here, but I trust somehow your heart found its way home. Emily blinked back sudden tears. I never told you everything, not because I didn't trust you, but because some truths are easier to write than to say out loud. I loved someone once, before your father. He wasn't rich or polished. He was kind and brilliant with his hands. He made things, and in that making, he gave people something to believe in. But I let him go, not because I stopped loving him, but because I didn't have the courage to fight for him. My family thought I deserved more. I thought they knew best. I regret That silence every day. So if you're standing in this place wondering whether to follow your heart, I want you to know, I see you, I believe in you, and if you found someone who reminds you of the way love should feel, hold on, be braver than I was. All my love, Mom. Emily sat on the floor of the tack room, the letter crumpled gently in her lap. Rain tapped against the tin roof above, slow and steady. She let it fall. Let it cleanse, not just the dust and sweat, but years of fear, of second-guessing, of letting other people define what was right. She stood, walked back into the barn, and picked up the hammer. One wall at a time, she told herself. One nail at a time. By the end of the week, the south wall stood tall and proud, rough around the edges, imperfect in its symmetry, but strong. Emily stepped back to admire it, not with vanity, but with something closer to peace. She was learning the language of wood and weight, of balance and intention. Late Friday afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up the drive, a flatbed loaded with reclaimed wood and metal siding. She hadn't ordered anything. The driver handed her her clipboard. "This all goes to Miss Emily Palmer, paid in full." Emily frowned. "By who?" "Didn't say. Just signed Rourke." He drove off before she could ask more. She stared at the pile of materials, then ran her hand along a thick plank, oak, aged and beautiful, just like the wood her mother used to sketch. Jack. He was still helping her. Even from a distance, that night she lit a small fire in the old stone pit behind the barn. She sat there alone, sketchbook in hand, drawing not the barn as it was, but as she imagined it could be. Warm light in the windows, horses in the stalls, children playing in the grass. She drew the outline of a man in the doorway, not detailed, just the shape, but her heart knew who it was. Jack wasn't gone. He was giving her space to stand on her own, and maybe, just maybe, he was watching to see if she would. The barn was beginning to breathe again. Emily could feel it in the way the air moved through the beams, how it no longer sighed with rot, but hummed with renewal. The scent of freshly sanded wood mixed with the earth, and light, real light, poured in through the newly hung windows. Every board she nailed into place carried the weight of memory and the hope of something lasting. Each morning, a new bundle of materials appeared at the edge of the driveway. First, a stack of metal brackets and fasteners, premium grade, the kind you couldn't find at the local hardware store. Then came custom-cut cedar panels, already treated and labeled. One afternoon, she found an entire tool set, brand new, high-end, and quietly delivered in a wooden crate marked only with an elegant slanted Ajax signature. Or perhaps just his way of saying, "I'm still here." She never saw the delivery drivers. Whoever coordinated it was careful, private, invisible. She should have felt unsettled. Instead, she felt known. One evening, Emily was painting the trim along the new loft window when she heard a car pull into the drive. Not a truck, not one of the quiet delivery vans. This engine purred like something expensive. She descended the ladder just as a silver sedan came to a halt under the oak tree. A man stepped out, tall and slightly disheveled in a charming sort of way, his hair tousled by wind, glasses slipping down his nose. He carried a leather satchel and wore the kind of rumpled linen shirt that said, "I live in airports." "Emily Palmer?" he asked, waving politely. She wiped her hands on her jeans. "That's me." "Richard Wells," he said, offering his hand. "Journalist, technically. These days I mostly write freelance human interest stuff for local papers." Emily hesitated before shaking it. "What brings you out here?" "Jack Rourke," he replied, as if the name itself were a business card. Her breath caught. Is he all right?" "He's fine. Not far. He's been keeping an eye on things." Richard smiled kindly. "He asked me to check in, and well, he mentioned you might have a story worth telling." Emily folded her arms, unsure how she felt about that. "I'm not looking for attention." "I know," Richard said. That's what makes the story interesting. He pulled out a small camera from his satchel. Mind if I take a few photos of the barn? She nodded slowly, watching as he walked around the structure, murmuring to himself. He paused often, photographing not just the building, but the small, quiet details. Her boots by the door, the chalk markings Jack had once left on the wall, the wildflowers growing along the back fence. Most people don't rebuild from the bones up, he said, glancing back at her. They slap on some siding, make it look new. But this barn looks remembered. Emily felt something swell in her chest. Gratitude, grief, pride, all of it. I'm not rebuilding it for appearances, she said. I'm rebuilding it because it matters. He nodded, pleased. That's what Jack said you'd say. That night she read the article Richard sent before submitting it. The headline made her blink back tears. One nail at a time, a daughter's. Promise and the barn that refused to die. The story was simple, elegant. It spoke of love, loss, and the quiet kind of strength that didn't need applause. Richard had woven in quotes from her mother's old journal, details Emily hadn't realized Jack even remembered. There were no mentions of Jack's past, no fanfare, no clues to his true identity. Just a quiet tribute to resilience and craftsmanship. The article went online the next morning, and everything began to change. By the end of the week, people started stopping by. First, it was a retired shop teacher from town. Heard you were rebuilding the Palmer barn, he said. Figured I'd lend a hand. Then a young couple from the next county looking to start a goat farm. Can we look around? They asked shyly. We read about it in the article. Got inspired. Local businesses began donating leftover materials. Volunteers showed up on weekends. Someone painted a sign and planted it at the edge of the driveway. Hope grows here. Emily stood by the barn one evening, hands on her hips, watching the sun set behind the hills. The golden light hit the boards just right, casting soft shadows through the slats and giving everything a warm, amber glow. The barn, her barn, was alive. But Jack was still gone. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 weeks, and as proud as she was of what she'd built, there was an ache in her that hadn't been eased by cedar or paint or progress. She missed him, not just his hands or his help, but his steadiness. The way he listened without interruption, the way his silence never made the room feel empty. She walked into the barn, past the ladder, up to the loft. On the wall, near the corner where she'd found her mother's journal, someone had written, in pencil, "You don't always have to be strong, just brave. K.R. Kate Rourke, Jack's sister." Emily ran her fingers over the writing and closed her eyes. He'd been here. She didn't know when or for how long, but he hadn't let go. And neither would she. The first email arrived at 6:12 a.m., just as Emily was tying up her boots. "Hi, Emily. Loved the story in the Gazette. Is it true your mechanic is Jack Rourke?" The Jack Rourke. She frowned, reread the message, and deleted it. By the time she reached the barn 20 minutes later, her inbox had 7 more. Some from strangers, others from old classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. By noon, her phone buzzed non-stop. A voicemail from a news anchor in Wichita, a text from a college friend in Chicago. One even came from her former boss in Denver. "You dating a billionaire? Seriously? Call me." She stood in the middle of the barn, heart pounding, the ladder still in her hand. What the hell was going on? She found the answer, as most people do these days, online. The local paper's human interest story had been picked up by a larger outlet. And from there, a national blog. A reader had recognized Jack in one of the photos, zoomed in on a scar along his jaw, matched it with an archived interview from 8 years ago, the golden mind behind Titan Diagnostics. Now, the story had a new title, Billionaire Builder in Hiding, Kansas Woman's Barn Sparks Mystery. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled, photos of Jack in a suit, smiling stiffly behind a podium, walking alongside his sister Kate. Headlines from a decade ago, a man she didn't recognize, but knew he had told her the truth, just not the full truth. By that evening, camera crews had arrived, not many, yet, but enough to make her heart sink. A white van parked crookedly near the end of the driveway. Two men with oversized cameras approached the barn. Another woman in heels was already halfway to the porch, phone in hand, shouting something about a brief statement. Emily turned and walked straight into the house. She shut the door, drew the curtains and leaned against the frame, suddenly dizzy. The knock came moments later. "Emily?" came a voice, gentler than expected. "It's me." She opened the door a crack. David stood there, suit wrinkled, expression unreadable. "What do you want?" she asked, voice cool. "To talk. Can I come in?" She let him. Inside, he sat stiffly at the table, glancing around the kitchen like it belonged to a stranger. "So," he said, folding his hands. "It's true." Emily didn't answer. "Jack. Rourke, billionaire, MIT dropout, media recluse, now moonlighting as a barn repairman." She crossed her arms. "He didn't lie." David snorted. "He didn't tell you who he was." He didn't have to. Her brother leaned forward. Come on. Do you realize what this means? He could fund the entire county if he wanted. We need to get ahead of this. Talk to him. Tell him we can." "This isn't about you," she snapped. David blinked. "This isn't about leverage or press releases or turning our tragedy into your portfolio. This is my life. He helped me rebuild this place when no one else showed up, when you didn't show up." David's face flushed. "You're throwing away an opportunity." "I'm holding on to something real," she said. "Something that doesn't have a dollar sign attached to it." A long pause stretched between them. Then for the first time in years, David looked almost ashamed. "I didn't know you felt that way," he said. "You never asked." The cameras didn't. Leave for 3 days. Emily kept her head down, refused interviews, and worked in the barn like nothing had changed, even as everything had. Volunteers stopped showing up. Donations slowed. The world, it seemed, wanted spectacle, not sincerity. She stood in the loft one afternoon, eyes closed, wind slipping through the slats. She could still feel Jack there, in the bones of the place. She missed his quiet, his steadiness, the way he looked at her like she wasn't a problem to solve, but a person to believe in. She didn't care about his money. She cared that he had left, that he hadn't trusted her to stay when the truth caught. Up to him. That night she found a package by the door. A thick manila envelope, no return address, just her name in that familiar block letter handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Emily, I never meant for you to be caught in the fallout. You didn't ask for this story, and you didn't deserve the storm it brought. I wanted to give you something real, and instead I handed you chaos. The truth is, I don't know how to be known without being taken. I lost everything once because I couldn't tell the difference between people who loved me and people who wanted what I had. But you never asked for anything, except for honesty. I should have given that to you first. If you can forgive me, I'll be waiting. Not far, but far enough to give you the choice. Jack." Emily sat down on the porch steps, letter clenched in her hands, eyes stinging. He hadn't disappeared. He was giving her the thing her mother never had, a chance to choose freely. She looked out. Across the darkened field, the barn silhouetted against the twilight sky, and knew her answer. She just didn't know yet how to say it. The news vans were gone by the time the morning fog rolled in, just tire tracks in the gravel and a few stray footprints in the grass to prove they'd ever been there. The silence that followed was almost too quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath, unsure of what came next. Emily stood in front of the barn, arms crossed, jacket tugged tight around her. The structure towered above her now, complete in form, nearly finished in spirit. Every inch of it bore her fingerprint, Jack's craftsmanship, and the memory of a promise she hadn't realized she was keeping. It was the first morning in weeks where she felt still. Until the phone rang, she let it buzz twice before answering. "Hello, Miss Palmer?" a warm voice asked. "This is Valerie from the county office. I'm calling to confirm your attendance at tomorrow's dedication ceremony." Emily blinked. Excuse me?" "The dedication for the Rourke Rural Resource and Community Center. It's being hosted on your property." Emily felt her breath catch. I didn't know I was invited." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a gentle chuckle. "Miss Palmer, you're not just invited, you're the guest of honor." The next day, folding chairs lined the grassy field in neat rows. White banners danced in the breeze, marked with a simple phrase, "Built with heart, rebuilt with hope." The barn, polished and standing proud, had been transformed, not into a museum or a showroom, but into something living. Inside, the stalls had been converted into multi-purpose rooms, one for teaching carpentry, one for agricultural skills, and one with shelves waiting for books and art supplies. At the far end hung a wooden plaque with hand-carved lettering, the Kate Rourke Center for Hands-on Hope. Emily stood beside it, fingers trailing along the name. Her eyes misted, not with sadness, but with something softer, something close to peace. "Do you like it?" She turned. Jack stood there, hair trimmed, shirt freshly pressed, but still unmistakably himself. Not a billionaire in a suit, not a recluse behind a title. Just Jack, her Jack. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "I wanted to let you choose, but I realized maybe I needed to choose too." They looked at each other for a long time. Words hovered in the air, apologies, confessions, maybe even something like forgiveness. But she just smiled. "You're late," he smiled back. Wouldn't be the first time. When the ceremony began, people filtered in from across the county. Farmers, teachers, students, volunteers who'd once delivered wood, and neighbors who'd once watched with folded arms. Even Sarah came, holding a pie and an expression that was softer than usual, and David, Emily's brother, stood beside her, holding their father's arm. Harold Palmer looked smaller than she remembered, age catching up to him in slow, silent ways. But his eyes still held that flicker of steel. He stepped forward as she approached. "I heard what you said to David," he said, voice quiet. Emily braced herself. "I also read your mother's journal, the part she wrote about the man she couldn't keep." His gaze found hers. "I didn't know. Not really. What she gave up." Emily's throat tightened. "I was raised to believe safety mattered more than love," he continued. "And I taught that to my children. I thought I was protecting you." "I know," she whispered, "but I was wrong," he said, "about a lot of things." She blinked, stunned. "I may not understand all your choices," he added, "but I see the result, and it's beautiful." Emily reached out and took his hand. "Thank you, Dad." They stood there a moment, the space between them mending in slow, quiet stitches. When Jack took the stage, if it could be called a stage, really just a hay bale and a microphone, he looked out at the crowd and scratched the back of his neck. "I've never been much for speeches," he said, and a ripple of laughter moved through the audience. "But I am good with my hands," he continued, "and I've learned that sometimes, when words fail, building something with purpose can speak louder than anything else." He paused, glanced toward Emily. "This barn isn't just wood and nails. It's a second chance. For a lot of people, not just me, a place to work, to learn, to fail and try again. We all need those." He stepped back down to modest applause, but the warmth in the air was real, not admiration for wealth, but respect for humility. Later, as the sun dipped low, Emily and Jack walked the perimeter of the property, Children played tag beneath the oaks. A few teenagers were already inside the barn, measuring planks for their first carpentry class. "I can't believe this is real," she said. "Me neither," Jack replied. "But here we are." She stopped, turning to him. "Why do you really come back?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you kept going. When everyone backed away, when the cameras left, when I left, you stayed. You built something with your hands. You didn't wait for me." Emily tilted her head. "Did you want me to?" "No," he said, taking her hand. "I wanted you to choose, and I hoped if you ever looked back, you'd see me still standing here." She smiled. "I do." And for the first time in a long time, there were no more questions between them, only possibility. A week after the dedication ceremony, the barn had settled into a new kind of rhythm. Children came and went after school, laughter echoing off its rafters. Volunteers rotated through the small carpentry classes. A retired librarian from town offered to organize a tiny reading nook in the corner stall where Emily's mother once painted. Life had taken root, not wild and messy like the past, but shaped, chosen. Emily found herself waking earlier each day, the kind of early that made her grateful for quiet mornings and the smell of percolating coffee. The porch swing creaked gently under her as she wrote notes for the community board, sign-ups for weekend workshops, schedules for winter repairs, a grocery list for the snack table. She wasn't just holding on to this place anymore, she was inhabiting it. Still, something lingered, not unfinished but unspoken. Jack had kept his distance in just the right way, present, helpful, but never assuming. He came and went with ease, slipping into a role that was somehow essential and invisible all at once. They talked every day. They worked side by side. They shared silence like two people who understood its value. But he hadn't asked her anything, and she hadn't said what waited quietly inside her heart. That Saturday, Jack asked her to meet him by the hill at the north edge of the property. "No tools?" she asked, eyeing his empty hands. "No tools," he smiled. "Just trust." The field was golden in the late afternoon, sun tilting westward, painting the tall grass in honey tones. They walked in step, and when they reached the crest of the hill, Emily stopped. Below them stood a small cabin, new, but designed with care. It looked like it belonged to the land, cedar siding, a tin roof that would hum in the rain, and a wide porch that faced the sunrise. The windows reflected the barn in the distance. She turned to him slowly. "You built this." "I did." "When?" "Started before I left. Finished it while you were rebuilding the south wall." Emily's eyes filled before she could stop them. "It's not a gesture," Jack said gently. "It's a plan." She laughed through the tears. "You built me a plan. I built us one, if you want it." He pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a key attached to a leather tag etched with her initials and his. "It's not a proposal," he said quickly. "I don't need to own anything. I just wanted to give us a place where the past isn't chasing us." Emily stared down at the key, speechless. "There's a studio space for your painting," he added, "and a back wall strong enough to hold anything you ever want to build." She looked up at him then, not as the girl from a crumbling farmhouse, not as the woman the world tried to pressure into practicality, but as herself, fully, freely. "I want it," she said. "Not because you built it, but because we did. Every nail, every wall." He smiled, that soft, crooked smile that had first shown up with sawdust on his sleeves. "You're sure?" he asked. She stepped into him, pressing her forehead gently against his. "I'm home." That evening they sat on the new porch, a blanket over their knees, mugs of tea in their hands. No music, no speeches. Just the barn in the distance, aglow with warm lights, the sound of someone hammering inside, learning. Jack reached into the small box beside his chair and pulled out an old, leather-bound book. "Your mom's journal," he said. "I kept it safe while you finished the barn. Emily took it with reverence, holding it like something sacred. She would have loved this, she whispered. All of it. The kids, the space, the chance to dream again. Jack nodded. She loved you enough to leave behind what she couldn't say. Emily opened the back cover. Inside was a folded page she hadn't seen before. It was brittle, handwritten, in her mother's neat cursive. If you find someone who sees the cracks and stays, who sees the weight you carry and reaches to lift it, you've found more than love. You found a partner. Don't wait for perfect. Build the real thing, one board at a time. Emily's voice shook as she read the final line aloud. The house may fall, the barn may rot, but love, real love, holds. Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. He reached for her hand, and she let him intertwine his fingers with hers. The lights in the barn flickered gently behind them. A breeze rustled the leaves. Somewhere far off, a train called into the dusk. And in that, quiet, they weren't fixing what had been broken anymore. They were building what would last, together. The spring sun filtered softly through the oaks, casting dappled shadows across the gravel path that wound toward the barn. The grass was fresh and green, wildflowers blooming in unruly clusters along the fence. The air carried a sweetness Emily hadn't smelled in years, honeysuckle and hay, and something else too. Peace. Inside the barn-turned community center, chairs had been set up in two neat semicircles, facing a small arch built from reclaimed wood and wrapped in white ribbon. Strings of fairy lights ran from beam to beam, twinkling like fireflies waiting for nightfall. The barn looked different now, alive in every sense of the word. And today it would host something new. A wedding. Not the grand kind with 100 guests and seating charts and a cake taller than a toddler, but something better, real, intimate, rooted in love, not spectacle. Emily stood in front of the mirror in the tack room, the very one Jack had first stayed in. Her dress was simple, lace, along the sleeves, cotton down the bodice, and boots peeking out from underneath. In her hair, a wildflower crown, bluebells and Queen Anne's lace, just like her mother used to wear in spring. "You look beautiful," Sarah said from behind her, voice soft and sincere. Emily turned. "Thank you for everything." Sarah shrugged, eyes a little glassy. "Turns out letting people love who they love isn't such a terrible thing." They laughed. Emily stepped outside, where the breeze caught the hem of her dress and lifted it like a sigh. Her father waited for her beneath the arch. "I never thought I'd get to do this," he said, taking her hand. "Walk my daughter down the aisle. And no, really no, she's walking towards something good." She squeezed his fingers. "You are the something good too." As the soft strains of an acoustic guitar played, they made their way down the aisle. Guests turned and smiled, neighbors, friends, volunteers who had helped rebuild the barn. The shop teacher, the goat-farming couple, Richard the journalist, grinning behind his camera, and Jack, standing at the end of the aisle waiting. He wore a vest over a crisp white shirt, no tie, boots polished but not too polished. His hair was slightly tousled by the wind, and when he looked at her, it was like he was seeing something holy. She reached him, and her father gently passed her hand. "To Jack's. I know you'll take care of her," he said. Jack nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I already do." The ceremony was short, the vows handwritten. Emily promised to keep building, not just barns, but life, with love, honesty, and her whole heart. Jack promised to never disappear again, to stay through storms and silence, and to always leave. The door opened. When the I-do's were spoken and the kiss was sealed, the barn erupted in applause. Children ran through the hayloft above, laughter echoing. Someone passed around lemonade, someone else brought out pie, and no one wanted to leave. That evening, just before twilight, Emily and Jack sat on the front steps of the little house on the ridge, overlooking the land that had brought them together. The barn glowed behind them like a lantern. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I know we did the vows already," he said, "but I wanted to give you this." Inside was a ring. Nothing flashy. A slim gold band with a tiny engraving inside, "Where love begins." Emily read the words and looked up at him, eyes shining. "This is perfect. Thought you'd say that." She took his hand and slid the ring on herself. No fanfare, no audience, just the quiet sound of wind and a love that had nothing to prove. A year later, the barn housed 5 different programs: woodworking for veterans, literacy nights for young readers, art classes for women in recovery, and a weekend farmers market. The Palmer farm had become a place where people didn't just come to work, they came to heal. Emily's sketches were now framed in the reading room. Jack taught basic mechanics twice a week, and behind the barn, the wildflower garden had expanded, each bloom planted in honor of someone lost but remembered. One afternoon, as she was tidying the book corner, a little girl walked in. Freckles. Across her nose, a backpack too big for her shoulders. "Are you the lady who fixed the barn?" she asked. Emily smiled. "I guess I am." The girl grinned wide. "My mom said you made this place because your heart was too big to fit in a house." Emily laughed. "Well, your mom might be right." She looked toward the door where Jack waited, leaning against the frame, watching her with the same look. He'd given her the first time they met, like she was worth staying for, like home. And in that barn, with its open doors and sun-warmed floors, something beautiful endured. Not because of wealth or legacy or headlines, but because 2 people believed that broken things could be rebuilt, that love could start over, and that sometimes the place you're meant to be is the very one you once thought you'd outgrown. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Your stories and support mean the world. And if this story touched your heart or reminded you that kindness still matters, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next story that might just stay with you forever. From my heart to yours, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care and never stop believing in second chances.